Hello everyone. Today we're going to go over what the hash functions are for Veracrypt. As you've used this software, you may have wondered what a hash function is, why it's in Veracrypt, and what the difference is between these hash functions. And it's really important that you know this because it's the other major part of the security of your encrypted data besides your password. So, as we look at the volume creation wizard here, you're going to see that you can choose between different hash functions. SHA-512, 256, Whirlpool, and Streebog. And now you're probably wondering, well, what is a hash function? So let's take a look at SHA-512 online. A hash function is a mathematical formula that takes any input and gives exactly one output. Every x has a y. So when I put in the word test, we get this output. The function only goes one way, so you can't look at this value and figure out what it could be from. The only way you would know that is if you've seen this before, that you've seen the word test and it comes out to this value, you've seen that before, or if you just tried a bunch of different values until you've eventually found out what this is. So that has some really interesting uses. And now you're probably wondering, well, how does Veracrypt use this? Well, there's a couple different ways, but we're going to go over the first one, which is the most important. Veracrypt has to turn your password into a key. And in cryptography, a password and a key are actually not the same thing. A password isn't usually in the format that encryption keys use, nor are they usually as secure. So let me show you an example of what I mean. So a 256-bit key is usually going to be in hexadecimal, or it's going to be in bytes. As you can see, it doesn't really look like a normal password. So we need to be able to make a weak password, make it strong, and we need to make that password into the right format of keys. And finally, we need to make it difficult for bad actors to try a bunch of passwords very quickly. And that's where the hash function comes in. So, Veracrypt uses PBKDF2, which stands for Password-Based Key Derivation Function 2. That puts your password into a special mode of hashes called HMAC. Your password is put into the hash function with a salt, which is random data, which makes trying to guess hashes more difficult. So your password gets put in. So your password gets put in, something like that. And then a bunch of salt is going to be put in, and the salt for Veracrypt is going to be very long. There's going to be a bunch of random data that goes in there with it. And then it's going to give you an output, and then it's going to go through this process many, many times. And this is going to happen at 500,000 times if you have the default set. And this really slows down attackers who are trying to guess the password. Because as the iteration number goes up, it takes a lot longer to try each password, especially with the salt. Because you may be wondering, well, if every X has a Y, then can't attackers just make a table of a bunch of previously created hashes? And that could happen, but that's the reason why we use random data put in to make that kind of attack more difficult. And by increasing the number of iterations, this heavily slows down attackers who are going to be using things like the kind of rigs that Bitcoin miners use, because those can calculate hashes very quickly. So then we are going to choose a hash function. We want that one that's secure, but also one that's fairly slow. Because by being slow, it makes it much harder for the attackers to try every password combination that's possible. But what's really interesting is that we can actually set the number of iterations as well. So once you get to the password part here, you see there's something called PIM. That stands for Personal Iterations Multiplier. And let's say I chose the number 500 for the PIM. 500 is multiplied by 1,000, and then 15,000 is added to it. So that means in PPKDF2, if you put 500 as a PIM, it will use 515,000 iterations. So you want to choose a PIM that's slow enough to stop the bad actors you think may be trying to access your data, but fast enough for it to be tolerable for you. So you need to make it take as long as you are willing to tolerate, keeping in mind the kind of threats that you have against you. And you can test the speed of a PIM in the benchmark part of Veracrypt under the Tools section. So yeah, you go to here and then you would test the PIM. And finally, the second purpose of the hash function is to help create a pseudorandom number generator to create safe salt for key files, etc. And that's what you're going to see when you create a volume and ask you to move your mouse around in the window a bunch. It takes your mouse movements along with other data happening on your machine, and it mixes it into a pool of random data, which makes your volumes cryptographically stronger. So yeah, that's it for hashes in Veracrypt. Thank you for watching. If you have any questions, let me know.